Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graban. Our guest today is Rachel Burch. She is a lawyer turned transformational coach and stand-up comedian. As host of the chart-topping podcast Love Before 100, Rachel chronicles her journey to find love while making her way down a dating scavenger hunt / bucket list. She lives with her two boys in Orange County, California, where she enjoys long walks on the beach and short commutes on the Pacific Coast Highway. She says she's obsessed with personal growth, all things woo, and healthy living. So, Rachel, thanks for being here. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. How do you define woo? And is it woo the same as woo woo? Not to get too sidetracked.
It is. It is the same as woo woo, but it's just half as much woo woo as most people engage in.
Do you have a favorite woo activity?
I do actually. I pull angel cards every day just to kind of give me the message for the day, and I just kind of take it as my interpretation of what the day will hold for me. Not so much that the spirit guides are coming in and appearing to give me that information, but I don't know. It's just kind of a fun thing that I like to do.
Okay. Well, that's a new one to me. When my wife and I lived in Southern California, I'll share the most woo thing we did was a breathwork class.
Okay.
Where you lay there and it's guided breathing with music. And, that was pretty woo. I enjoyed it though. We did it a second time, but I feel like I could do this at home, I think.
Yeah. Public woo is kind of not for you.
Well, we're not in California anymore, so that doesn't feel like a very Cincinnati thing. Maybe I just haven't looked hard enough for. There's woo everywhere, probably.
Probably.
But, okay. Well, so now that my woo detour is off and behind us now, let's get into the real topic here. This isn't a podcast about woo. It's a podcast about favorite mistakes. So, Rachel, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
Well, it's funny because I've made many, as probably we all have. And I narrowed it down to two that are on the same path. And so I would say pursuing my childhood dream and not getting... My childhood dream was to be a lawyer. And my law school offered a joint JD MBA program that I wanted to do, but I was discouraged from doing it because you wouldn't get a ranking, and then you couldn't kind of go along the traditional track that everybody does. So I didn't do it, and my mistake was not doing it.
So did the law school probably discouraged, or was it people giving you advice about your legal career?
So it was my dad. He was kind of still is, but a very big litigator in Orange County where we live. And he did a lot of hiring, and, he knew the ins and outs of how to get a job. He really helped me. I mean, he was the inspiration for why I wanted to become a lawyer. Him and Matlock. I like to joke I was brainwashed by my dad and Matlock. So he really, said, you're not going to have a ranking, and it's going to take you an extra year, and you won't be able to follow this traditional path that, everyone wants to follow. So I didn't.
So when we can unpack both of these, I guess. So you did complete the law school program. You passed the bar. At what point did you decide that childhood dream was a mistake, if I heard you correctly?
Probably from day one in the first law firm that I worked at. I was in the law for 10 years, and I was in 3 different firms, and then I was general counsel. So I had a very good career, as again, like the traditional path really calls for. I ended up graduating top 15% of my class, which was also a big achievement, and something that was very kind of important to follow that path and end up where I did. So yes, I often share the story of being in my first year um, in this high-rise building in downtown Los Angeles, and realizing I had made a huge mistake. And
Yeah.
it was around the time that there was in the news a lot of people on Wall Street that would just jump out of the skyscrapers because they were so miserable, and for whatever reason they did.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like I can really understand why they might do that. I, didn't plan on doing that. I wasn't at
Yeah.
that point, but
Yeah.
it actually scared me that I thought I can understand why they might think that
Yeah.
was a better path than like letting down your family. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. Um, why? I mean, you're not the first attorney to be on the podcast here talking about that career choice
Yeah.
being a mistake. I've at least one friend I can think of from college. I mean, and sadly, I mean, doctors quite often feel the same way. So I'm not picking on law, but I mean, what I won't ask you to generalize it, but what was it for you that made you think, oh, this is not what I want to do, or how much of it was the, oh, I wish I'd done the MBA thing because then I would have other options.
Yeah. Well, I can say, because I know a lot of attorneys from law school, from my different firms, from just all different walks of life. And some of them love it and many of them don't. And I think the pressure of like billable hours is something that I don't think people are properly prepared for. It's,
Yeah.
very intense. And there's a lot of the actual practice of law by itself probably wouldn't be so bad,
Mhm.
except that I envision being in court and litigating and kind of doing the things that I enjoyed, but on a day-to-day basis, you're sitting at your desk, you're writing memos, you're responding to form interrogatories, all this kind of discovery that is mind numbing. It's a
Mhm.
bunch of objections. It's the same, it's like Groundhog Day, but it's
Mhm.
Groundhog Day under like immense pressure. Just remember Googling so many times like non-law jobs for lawyers, because
Yeah.
I think when you start walking down a path, you get to a place where you think, well, I've already committed.
Mhm.
I can't start over. I can't, I have a coach and he gives the example of if you bought a first class ticket from LA to Paris and halfway through the engine's cut out, would you stay on the plane because you paid for your ticket, or would you grab the parachute,
Right.
and get the heck out of there? And so I think a lot of people feel like a time, a money commitment, an identity commitment. I mean, I
Mhm.
loved being like, I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, going out to bars in college and being accepted to law school. Oh, I'm going to law school. It was like a big kind of ego thing. And then to
Yeah.
leave it
Mhm.
is hard sometimes too.
Well, then, like you said, the connection to your dad. How did he react when he heard that you didn't feel like it was a good fit for you, even though you had done well in law school, you met that challenge? I mean, how did he react? Did he try to coach you through some of it? Like, yeah, the grunt, it's grunt work, but it gets better.
No, he was really supportive,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
exceptionally supportive. Now I went, when I was general counsel, I ended up going part-time because my son had some developmental delays. And so I went
Mhm.
part-time to really tend to him,
Yeah.
and I like to kind of say that it finally took an acceptable reason to leave the law. Like I can't say, oh, I'm so brave, I, parachuted out of the plane.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, oh, I have a reason. I have a legitimate reason that people, but then I didn't go back because my son ended up getting completely caught up,
Mhm.
I went back to school and got my health coaching certification so I could
Mhm.
kind of assist from that place.
Yeah.
And once he was caught up, I was like, I'm not going back. I'm
Yeah.
going to start over. I'm going to find something else. It was miserable there.
Yeah.
So the bravery kind of kicked in there and has
Mhm.
continued to, but he was exceptionally supportive.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thinking back to, I mean, did you think about going back and doing an MBA? Or, I mean, had people said that would that have been doable? No, you're to be working as an attorney, you don't have the time to go get an MBA, even part time.
You know what's funny? Just as I was kind of getting my hair done for this interview,
Uh-huh.
I was thinking about our conversation, what it might look like. And this is the woo part. I have a belief that like everything's always working out. We go through the experiences that we're supposed to. I'm
Yeah.
not going to consider law school a waste of 10 years. I met my ex-husband there. I have 2 kids from it that I wouldn't have. I can now threaten class actions to any, business that upsets me. So I have, I've written cease and desist letters to like my son's school,
Yeah.
I haven't sent them, but it gives me a sense of power. So I don't regret any of it.
Yeah.
But
Right.
as I was getting ready, I thought I could go back to get my MBA now. Like it hadn't occurred to me, but I
Mm,
thought I could do that now. And
yeah.
maybe I'd meet my second husband there. But then I thought, well, he'd probably be in his 20s. So that would probably be a bad thing.
Well, executive MBA programs tend to have a little bit older student population. Here I am giving dating advice.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where.
I don't. I mean, but yeah, I mean, you could go back and do that, or it's you're pursuing as we'll talk about with the podcast, Love Before 100. I mean, do you feel like the law degree has helped set you up now for things that you've transitioned into, at least as coaching and comedy?
Yeah, I definitely found in coaching that when I would ask questions of my clients, I could kind of see, they teach you issue spotting in law school. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like I could spot the issues of why somebody was holding back or what their so they go, oh, I never thought of it that way. And then so I really did learn the art of asking good questions.
Yeah.
For comedy, it, I guess, gave me a little confidence in standing up in front of a room full of people and, stating
Yeah.
your case. And it definitely gave me material. So,
Yeah. Is there any room for an attorney in the courtroom to try to be funny, like to get the jury kind of liking you? Or, I mean, like,
well,
is
it
that,
depends on the judge for sure.
yeah.
And for me, I was always second chair. So my jokes were usually making fun of the partner that was first chair when we got back to the law firm. But
And to that partner's face, or no, to entertain your
sometimes,
coworkers
sometimes.
sometimes. um, you weren't trying to parachute out of that career immediately by
Yeah,
a
exactly.
risky joke. Um, did you grow up wanting to be a comedian, or where did
No.
that kind of evolve from?
So, in high school, I was voted best sense of humor, which was really surprising to me because I was so shy. I didn't realize that people actually like really knew who I was or saw that side of me. Mostly it was like soccer practice where I would talk about the boys I had crushes on and how they were not interested in me. And, so it was, probably from there. And
Uh,
then I would say maybe when I was an early attorney, my mom was very involved in different fundraisers and charities. And I went to this one event, and the woman had written a book called What Would You Do If You Had No Fear? And everyone had to go around and stand up and say what they would do if they had no fear. And I said I would travel the world performing stand-up comedy because I was afraid of flying, and I was definitely afraid of, getting up there and just bombing. That would
yeah.
have been the worst thing. And so I realized, oh, this is a deep desire of mine.
Mhm.
So my nature is once I identify a desire, then I have to pursue it.
Mhm.
So I took a class, and the class it's kind of like what they say about like making laws and making sausage. Like you don't want to see the
Mhm.
process because
Yeah.
nobody would laugh, nobody got anything. And then when I finally got up and performed, they had this graduation performance.
Yeah.
Everybody laughed, and I was like, I knew I was funny. And I had one woman come up and take a picture with me afterwards, a stranger. She said, like, this is for when you're famous. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh, okay. So
Yeah.
it kind of took off from there.
Yeah, and so there's it seems like kind of a process. I remember, I think it's old now, like more than 20 years old. Jerry Seinfeld, there was a documentary. I think it was just called Comedian, that showed how different comics, and including Jerry Seinfeld, like you see nowadays it's the hour-long Netflix special, or it's the arena show, but how they test material in front of small audiences, late night, New York Comedy Club, try different phrasing, and like it sounds like it's a very iterative process, and then you see the end result. I'm like, oh, brilliant! Look what they did.
Absolutely.
Right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that process, maybe as you've experienced it, and comedy shows that you've done?
Well, so Bill Burr is one of my favorite comedians, and I saw him perform, and he was trying out new material, and it was awful. Like, it was awful. And then later, I think he actually made it into his Netflix special. It ended up being obviously fine-tuned to the point where it was genius, but it has to be awful. And that's kind of this whole, there's a book, The Artist's Way, and she talks about being a beginner in the creative process. And so with comedy, I did my first open mic finally. I've been doing comedy for 10 years. I finally did my first open mic 2 weeks ago, because I was hosting a show last Saturday, and I hadn't performed in a year. So I wanted to get some of that stuff out. And it was very hard. I didn't get very many laughs because comedy is definitely a process. And sometimes I'll be in the shower and the best way of phrasing something will come to me. Also, comedy is mostly energy, right? Like, if you were to ask me right now to tell you my set, it wouldn't be that funny. But when you're in a room full of other people potentially drinking, and there's just an energy, and you have that kind of, you can see comedians like Louis C.K., different comedians, they just make a facial expression and everybody, bursts out laughing. So it's honing mostly your energy and your confidence in being up there, not being afraid to not get a laugh, to keep going after that. That's really kind of the skill of stand-up comedy.
Yeah. Well, like I said, in Comedy Club, you've showed up as audience. You've shown up expecting, being prepared to laugh.
Yeah.
Especially if you're there seeing a comedian who you like, and that raises the expectation. So I imagine the Bill Burr thing must have been jarring, because you're like, I'm a fan, he's funny, but what's going on? But you realized it was part of that process.
Well, they usually say, I'm just trying out some new material too, which also, I don't know if that's the best thing, because you kind of come like, okay, this is going to be kind of rough. Not sure where it's going. But yeah, it was kind of jarring. It was very disappointing. But as a comedian, I can also see okay, there's potential here. Like, for example, I got an Instagram ad the other day for Girl Scout cookie smelling deodorant. The deodorant smells like Girl Scout cookies. And I was like, oh, this is something. I don't know what it is, but this is something. So I screenshotted it, and that was my first step. And then I just left it for a while. Then I sent it to a comedian that was coming to my show, and I said, there's something here. And he said, you should wear it. And then I thought, oh, I got to order it. So I ordered the girls, they have do-si-do and Samoa flavored, although they don't call it that anymore, flavored or scented deodorant.
Don't eat the deodorant, right?
So I had it sent to me, and then, I smelled it. I haven't worn it yet, but that's the third step. And then kind of seeing what comes of it. So, if I showed up and I said, look at this funny deodorant I ordered, it would just kind of be like, eh. But it's going to take a couple months for me to really figure out, how does this work? Do I wear it to birthday parties? Do I, do I wear it on dates? Where's the best place that you wear Girl Scout cookie scented deodorant? And who are you attracting when you do? So it's an experimental kind of process like that.
Because there's a couple of directions that could go in. Yeah. So you're just waiting to see how that plays out. Yeah.
Exactly.
From concept to a joke, and then the timing and the phrasing, and I mean, do you really get down into the weeds of certain words are funnier than others, like do-si-do is kind of a funny sounding thing, right?
Yes. And even timing. One of the podcast episodes that I did, my editor edited out a space, and I was like, no, you got to put that back in. That's the whole joke. You got to have timing. And that's, I think, what a lot of people miss. They're funny. You'll see a lot of people, presenters at things, try to make a joke and it doesn't land. And you're like, it is funny, but it's usually like they rush through it. Just
Yeah.
like add a beat and you'll crack everybody up.
Yeah. Yeah. So how was the process for you then as a podcaster? Was that a similar development going into comedy, starting a podcast? Do you feel like, well, I don't know, put words in your mouth and I'm going to be bad at it before I get better? Or like, how do you think about developing the podcast Love Before 100?
So Love Before 100 was my second podcast. I had one before, which is not out there anymore because I kept the RSS feed. But what happened with that one was I just felt like I need a podcast. And I hear this from a lot of people. And some people actually make like there's too many out there. There's not too many out there. It's still like a very early kind of adopter space. So especially people that continue with it. I mean, the number of podcasts that die after one episode is like mind-boggling. But for me, I knew I needed one. And so that was the first step. And then I talked about...
So to dig into that a little bit, when you say I needed one, like thinking as a coach, as a comedian, both?
As a coach. Definitely as a coach.
Yeah.
And I was in a group coaching program at the time with probably 150 other coaches. We had live events and we had them all over the world. And so I told my coach on one of our group calls, I bought a podcasting course. I went through it. It took me, from when I bought it to when I actually did it, it was a 6-week course. It was 3 months before I even opened the course, right? I do everything kind of like that. And then one weekend I felt inspired and I binged the whole course. I recorded my first, which ended up being my second episode, and scheduled my third episode. So I had everything ready to go except the first episode, which was my intro where I had to talk about myself. And I did not want to do that. I had a lot of resistance. And so I told my coach and she said, well, that's fine. And our next event was in the south of France. And I had bought the tickets and the hotel and everything. She said, that's fine, but you can't come in to the event if your podcast isn't launched by the time you get there. And that was like 2 weeks, away.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I need a push. And I was like, okay. So I sat down and recorded my first episode and launched it. And I had 67 episodes of that podcast. And then I was actually looking to launch season 5 of the last one. And I met with a producer. That's a whole woo story of how I connected with this guy who used to be the producer on The Bachelor Australia and The Biggest Loser Australia, all these different reality shows. And I thought, oh, mine's kind of like a reality show. So this is perfect. And together we kind of carved all the different ideas that I had and made this totally different show. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, tell us about the show. I mean, is this chronicling your adventures? I don't know. I don't normally ask, I don't normally ask personal questions, but I'm going to. Like, how long have you been divorced? And is this just then wading back into dating life again? You thought, okay, well, podcast?
Yeah. Yes. So I've been divorced 7 years. I didn't date for many years after my divorce. I actually ended up going on a date, my first date in the south of France when I was back there. It wasn't the same trip. It was a different one. Horrified. My friend set up a profile for me. She swiped for me and she super swiped some guy. It was the weirdest experience, but I knew it was funny. I knew it was like comedy material. And I was like, okay, I'm going to put this away for some day later.
Yeah.
And then I didn't date anymore. That was enough to like turn me off. And then before COVID, I dated a little bit and then I stopped again. And so about 2 years ago, I decided, okay, I'm ready to meet somebody.
Yeah.
I had a lot of skepticism. I had success in a lot of areas of my life, but love, besides my ex-husband, who I have nothing bad to say about, has not been one of those areas.
Yeah.
And so I ended up meeting a man on a plane ride, and we had a long distance fling relationship, whatever, for a couple months. And then it kind of broke my heart because it didn't work out.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is such a lonely, awful experience. I should probably make a podcast about it and share how lonely it is. And I talked about everything on my other podcast, but I never talked about dating because I'm typically a very private kind of person. But I really felt that it was my job to help people feel less alone. And it's worked.
Mhm.
I've received random messages from strangers from Long Beach, which is right up the road, all the way to Denmark, just telling me, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your story. You inspired me to. I have one lady in Denmark who's in this really happy relationship, and she'll
Mhm.
send me updates, and I just feel like so grateful that I get to be kind of a part of that. But yeah, so I take the personal development and the comedy and storytelling, and I take everyone along on the journey and try to make it entertaining, but also weave in personal development and
Yeah.
spirituality and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, and you shared, a career mistake with us. Maybe this podcast would have been a lot more popular if it was about, love and relationship mistakes, like the namesake song, My Favorite Mistake by Sheryl Crow,
Yeah.
was about a love mistake.
Yeah.
But that's not me. I wouldn't enjoy hosting that show. So that's, that's a show for somebody to host. But when and I was going to ask, love before 100, like that's not a very optimistic time frame
Well,
and
it's
title.
like a double meaning, because
Yeah.
there's a bucket list, like a scavenger hunt, right, that you referenced, and there's points. For
Yeah.
me, to motivate me to do anything, I need rewards. And so it was kind of like, originally the list was go out with, like a fireman, a doctor, someone in the military, like a bald guy, a B-list celebrity. It was like this list, and there were points, and then the more points I got, I would get like a new iPad or like something that I've been wanting to get myself. And over time, the list changed and the points changed. And so the concept was find love before I hit 100 points or 100 years, whichever comes first.
Yeah. And then, you talk about rankings, and you say you were in top 15% of your law school class,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then that podcast, there are podcast rankings. You got into the top 1%. Do I remember right?
Yep.
This
Yes.
podcast or context is in the top 3%,
Yeah.
but that's even a higher bar to go from top 3% to top 2% to top 1%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something. What do you think were some of the keys? It says on your website, I think this is a great phrase, launching your podcast isn't the hard part. Making it worth listening to is. So how much of it is about just, boy, you nail it with the content, it's compelling, it hooks people, versus, sort of like quote unquote marketing of the
Yeah.
podcast?
So all my marketing has been mostly word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I've done 2 paid ads on like the Overcast app, but other than that, so far it's been word of mouth. And at a recent podcasting convention that I went to, I heard that is like the number one. That is the best way to really grow, is word of mouth. So if you love Mark's show and you're listening, share it with one of your friends. Because it's hard work to do podcasts, and I think it's a great way to thank the podcaster, is to share your love, whether you message them directly. I love screenshotting stories or reviews and sharing them, and so that's, I would say my success has been from my listeners, and I try to thank them as much as possible. I even say they're like my virtual wing person. Like I would not be dating seriously if it wasn't for my podcast, and if nobody was listening, there'd be no reason to do it. So I often thank them for just putting myself out there.
That's a great tip. And I hear that when I listen to the podcast, I'll say to the listener, thank you for taking time, because I mean, there's so many things. Look, I mean,
Yeah.
people could be reading, listening, Netflixing, going for a walk without their earbuds in. I mean, there are just so many different things people can do with their time.
Yeah,
It really
absolutely.
is nice when someone gives you the gift of listening,
Absolutely.
or
It's a
the
nice
gift of
compliment.
the gift of sharing your insights and experiences with us here, Rachel. I'd love to hear a little bit also about your coaching work. Like, does anyone grow up saying, "I will someday I'm going to be a coach"?
I
Maybe
mean,
they
probably
like,
now
maybe
these
sports,
days, but
maybe not.
I've been doing it for about 9 years now, and um, it it really was, they call you counselor when you're a lawyer. That's one of the terms for it. And I really, I used to say giving unsolicited advice was my love language. I mean, it just like not, it wasn't, I still have to tell my sister, people pay me thousands of dollars for what you're getting for free. And you're like, basically covering your ears, but that's fine. Um, I, it's interesting because it sounds weird to say this, but I really want to help people, and the way that I want to help people, and not all people, because not everybody's nice, like there's a lot of miserable people out there. I want to help them not be miserable, but again, it's the people that are willing to do the work and are willing to um, show up for themselves and not be rescued necessarily.
Mhm.
Um, but it's a form, it's teaching, it's sharing, it's helping. I think it's just kind of who I really was born to be. And I think that was kind of part of the mistake, was that I didn't really tune into that part of me. It was more like, I want to be like my dad and Matlock, and it seems fun to be in court and solve cases.
Yeah.
But the way I like doing that is through coaching people and connecting with them.
And learning how to ask questions is different than, like, it's a different style of it than interrogating someone.
Right.
A coachee doesn't want to feel interrogated, but they're looking for insight of the questions or the observations you might have as a somewhat less or a unbiased observer.
Well, the reason it's good is because they're the ones with the answers. They know, and they're articulating, they actually are hearing themselves say what the problem is or what the solution is. It's them that's, coming up with it. And so then usually that's when I use comedy to kind of, if there's something hard or particularly uncomfortable there, I'll use comedy to kind of point out how ridiculous, the situation they've created for themselves is,
Yeah,
or the limitations that they're living by. We
yeah,
talk a lot about fighting for your own limitations. A lot of people will try to convince you of why they're limited and why they're unable to do something. And I do it too. I find myself doing it too. I found myself doing it when I was considering season 4 of the podcast. So
yeah.
it's not a judgment, but it's like,
Right.
it's important that we see that in ourselves.
Yeah. Or even as you talked yourself into leaving the legal profession. I mean, sometimes these decisions are difficult, and people have reasons to change. They have reasons not to change. And to help work someone through that process, I think it's interesting to try to turn, when people are talking about the reasons they can't. I don't do. I mean, I think I find it helpful in consulting work that I do to try to help turn that. And so, well, tell me why this idea or this dream or whatever you're trying to do, tell me why it's important, and getting them to talk about the positive reasons why instead of the barriers
Yeah.
can be helpful. Barriers might be real, but some of it's just that mental
Right.
orientation of, oh, well, I this is important, so I'll figure it out. I'll get there.
Yeah, exactly. Reframing. I like to reframe kind of the viewpoint, and then also Dr. Michael Bernard Beckwith, he talks about asking better questions. So people be like, there's no way I could do this. And it's like, well, how could you? How could you do this? I
Right,
found myself asking that yesterday, and I thought, oh, look at all these possibilities that open up when instead of saying I can't, how could I?
right,
So,
right.
yeah.
How could I? How might we? Those are powerful questions. I notice they're open-ended questions, which makes me think of, and this is more of like in the Stephen Wright brand of comedy, perhaps. I'm not a comedian, but it would be, I do like to ask people with a fairly deadpan tone, do you like open-ended questions?
That's funny.
It's kind of a very specific funny to a certain audience. So no
Because
Netflix.
that's not an open-ended question.
Exactly.
Just for the listener who may not have caught it.
And the and Rachel was laughing. See, like when people are just listening, sometimes people are smiling. See, like right now. Okay, now you hear it, right? She was laughing. She reacted.
I was laughing.
I didn't bomb.
Also, like I said, if you were on stage, you would have killed. But
well, and again, I'm not saying I had any great delivery there, but thank you for laughing at that.
Yeah.
And then you went and explained my joke. Well,
just in case. I mean, I get in trouble. My ex-husband he was like, you cannot talk to the people that come into the house to do any like services. One time there was a plumber and he explained to me this very intricate procedure that he was going to perform on my sink. And it just went right over my head. So I said, are you a real plumber? Joking, obviously. He didn't think it was funny. He billed me extra. And I was like, it was a joke. I was just saying, like, I don't have any clue what you're even talking about. So some people
you could try that with a doctor sometime.
Yeah, exactly.
Understand. Well, our guest today has been Rachel Burch. Podcast is Love Before 100, and I'll put links in the show notes to social media and the podcast and the website. I think one other question maybe here to wrap up here. You've made different career transitions. You've had life transitions. Maybe the podcast and the dating is an ongoing transition. But whether it's through what you've lived through or coaching others, what advice do you have for people who are looking to make some sort of change or pursue a dream, but they find themselves kind of in that situation you shared about of being a little scared or uncertain?
Yeah. So read books for sure. One of my favorite for people that there's a chapter in the book Think and Grow Rich, the persistence chapter 8 in my volume. And I did this exercise a long time ago. Bob Proctor, before he passed, had recommended it on one of his coaching calls. And he said, wake up at 5:30 a.m., find 2 people in your same time zone, so it's also 5:30 a.m. for them, and read the persistence chapter every day for 90 days. And I did that a couple years ago with 2 friends. And I can still recite parts of it from memory. And it really burned into me the idea of persistence, that you just keep going and you don't quit. And so once you have that, if this is a true heart's desire goal and you have persistence, nothing can stop you. But you have to make sure, one, that it's an actual heart desire goal and not influenced from family or the public or shoulds or any of that kind of stuff. And then you have to make sure that you have the persistence to keep going. And if you have those 2 ingredients, then you'll hit it.
Yeah. And then I know, so I'm going to talk about how the sausage is made, right? I've come up with a lot of my own questions, but when people are guests on a podcast like Rachel, sometimes there are suggested questions. And that last one I asked was a suggested question that I thought was good. Well, I'm going to flip that on you and put you on the spot. Okay. What would be the worst advice?
The worst advice
that someone could give to somebody in that situation?
First of all, I forgot that I asked that question, but I thought, oh, that's a good question. So I'm very impressed with myself and you right now. The worst advice is going to people who haven't achieved what you want to achieve for advice on how to reach that goal. There's a lot of opinions out there, a lot of people that want to, tell you why you shouldn't do something. My dad, who I love and I look up to, and I think is one of the greatest people in the entire world. I bought a car that was older than me, and he thought it was the craziest, dumbest idea that I could have possibly done. My dad's not a car guy. I'm
Yeah.
not a car girl, but I am a vintage Bronco girl, and it was a
Oh.
vintage Bronco.
Mhm.
And I ended up selling it for a variety of reasons, but I made my money back. Every dollar I spent, even on
Mhm.
gas, even on insurance, on everything. Plus, I made a profit on it. If I still had it, I would have made an even greater profit. But my dad thought I was crazy
Yeah.
and was completely against it. And I love him and I respect his opinion, but he doesn't know about what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And so the worst thing that you could possibly do is go to somebody that doesn't understand exactly what it is that you're doing, that hasn't achieved what you're doing, or at least attempted it, um, for their input.
Yeah. So if someone wanted help on building a top 1% podcast, they could talk to you. You've done
Yes,
that?
I've
I've
done
come
that.
close.
They could come to me.
You've done that. You mentioned the Bronco. I'm going to end on were you an Arrested Development fan?
A little bit because it was
Series
it was based in Orange County.
set in Orange County. And there's an episode, this might seem indelicate considering recent news and O.J. Simpson passed away, but there was an episode where they were talking about the Ford Bronco, and one of the characters said, like, "Oh, Ford had to rename that because of the whole O.J. Simpson thing. Oh, what are they calling it now? The Escape, Ford Escape, real vehicle." And like, I can only like, yeah, life is funnier than fiction sometimes.
Sometimes.
That's an odd note for me to end that on. Nothing funny. Well, Arrested Development, funny. So
Arrested Development is funny. Plus material.
yeah. So if I bombed, I'm going to keep going at it. So this is why we'll leave comedy to the professionals. Rachel Burch, thank you for being here as a professional coach, recovering attorney, stand-up comedian. This has been fun. Thank you for being a guest here and sharing your story, having the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
All right, thanks.